So today we've got a 03, 04-ish Articat 300. This thing's a gem. Guy brought it to me because it's leaking oil. That's just from about 6 hours of sitting, and that's not even all of it. The first puddle is coming from right in there. I don't know if it's the oil line or the filter cover, but one of them is leaking pretty good. But the real issue and why he brought it to me is, see all the JB weld they put up in there? Yeah, it's leaking out of the base of the cylinder. So apparently it needs a base gasket. And somebody thought it was a brilliant idea to put JB weld all the way around it. See? All the way around. So I get to chisel that stuff all off and pull the upper end off and see why it's leaking, and if it's just the base gasket or if it's got other issues too that I can't see. Won't know until I get it apart. So stay tuned. Alright, now that I've got the machine up on the Harbor Freight lift table, I've actually had some time to take it apart and see why they JB welded everything. And what it turned out was the base gasket had blown out. And I figured that out pretty quickly because as I was taking off the 4 nuts to hold the cylinder head on, the upper 2 were pretty tight. I mean, like they should have been. The bottom 2 were loose, like barely needed a wrench loose, and they must have just came loose. And it's amazing the head gasket didn't let loose, but it's metal, so I mean, as you can see, it kind of was starting to, but the base gasket obviously let right loose. Super simple to take these apart. You undo all those bolts. You don't even have to take them out. You can keep them right in their place. Just lift that cap off. That exposes the head and the cam. From there, you take the 2 bolts off the cam, pop the sprocket off, pop the cam out. You leave it in, but don't lose this. That little spacer goes right, or that little keeper goes right in that groove. Don't lose that down in there. Once you get that off, there's these 4 bolts. There's 2 nuts. Head comes off. Well, you gotta take the exhaust, obviously. Then the cylinder, same thing. These studs are already out. They're already clean. Those are off the head. The only thing you gotta worry about is 2 more nuts here. I always take the chain tensioner out. Makes things a little bit easier. You don't have to when you're taking it apart, but you do once you're putting it back together. That guide stays. This one sits in the head. Just pull it out. Nothing crazy. Typical any small engine really, for that matter. You got the chain tensioner. I always pull the spark plug too. Makes things a little easier. But yeah, that's what happened. The guy never probably had this thing serviced when he should have, and they never, of course, checked the head bolts like it's recommended, and blew the base gasket out, kept riding it, put some JB weld trying to plug up the oil leak, and well, the head gasket was about to go. Luckily, it's still kind of there. I don't have any worries that it warped it. This thing really wasn't ridden hard, it just wasn't taken care of. I mean, as you can see, there's missing parts, front end's all bashed up, no lights. It just wasn't taken care of. Young kids had it and crashed it up. So next is looking into why it's leaking oil out the O-rings, I'm assuming, and the back half, but won't know until I get it apart. Alright, so I couldn't quite tell exactly where the oil leak was coming from. I wasn't sure if it was the hose or the oil filter cap. So I pulled them both off. I pulled the cap off first because there's an O-ring right there, and it's cheap, easy. I'll replace it. I looked over the cap. There's no cracks in it. Sometimes they can get cracked. And then when I went to pull the oil line off to see what the oil or the O-ring looked like, one of the bolts was kind of loose. It was pretty loose, to be honest with you. So that's probably why it was leaking, but I'm going to put a new O-ring onto it before I put it back together just to make sure. So yeah, easy enough. Look at that. Just noticed it needs a CV shaft. We'll see if he wants to put that in or not. Till the next video, guys.
Yeah.